Hello, sir. Hey, Tony.
All right.
Hi, Todd. How you doing?
Good, you, man?
Okay, good.
Good.
Thank you.
Actually have some people joining us today too. I figured this would just be for
Halloween, yeah.
later. But these are good Christians waiting to celebrate All Saints tomorrow.
Maybe they're stuck at home handing out candy.
Yeah, just kidding. Just kidding. I didn't mean that. There's no such thing as a good Christian.
Are you making moral judgments, Jason?
I'm making theological judgments.
Ah.
Todd Littleton,
Yes, sir.
Can you hear my dog voraciously chewing on a bone right now?
No.
Okay, good.
Well, now I can.
Welcome everyone to the fourth session of our online discussion of Grace in Practice. It is Halloween, so a whole lot of people are not going to be able to join us tonight. And so we're just going to go at it. We have been having lay people give us their takeaways and questions at the beginning. But tonight we're just going to start with Tony Robinson because he is headed to Mexico. But before we do, Josh, you have an offering for us.
I do. Let's see here. All right. Come a little bit closer. Hear what I have to say. Just like children sleeping, we could dream this night away. But there's a full moon rising. Let's go dancing in the light. We know where music's playing. Let's go out and feel the night. Because I'm still in love with you. I wanna see you dance again. Because I'm still in love with you. On this harvest moon. When we were strangers, I watched you from afar. When we were lovers, I loved you with all my heart. But now it's getting late, and the moon is climbing high. I wanna celebrate, see it shining in your eyes. still in love with you. I wanna see you dance again, because I'm still in love with you. On this harvest moon. I'm still in love with you. I wanna see you dance again, because I'm still in love with you. On this harvest moon.
The sweet song.
It's
Harvest Moon.
One of my favorite albums. Thank you, Josh.
Who's the artist, Jason?
Neil Young.
Oh.
Yeah, and then a few years ago, one of my favorite bands, Blitzen Trapper, covered that entire album live for Record Store Day. And it's great, Josh. If you don't have it, if I knew how to send it to you, I would. But yeah, we'll figure that out. Okay, so we are here to talk about something that Todd Littleton and I were talking about in Texas and Oklahoma over the weekend. And Tony, I would like you to use this chapter as a springboard. But there are parts of the book that I think if Paul Zoll could go back and rewrite, he would change things or emphasize things differently. I think that was clear in the marriage section. So that some of the language seems a little dated now. And the idea of grace in politics, right, is very much pre the period we are in right now.
Right.
And so I don't know that there is a more needful conversation for Christians to be having, not the kind of Christians so-called who are blowing shofars and carrying, weapons and talking about, the apocalypse. But just normal church-going Christians who actually go to church. Don't just say that they're evangelical. Normal Christians, I think one of our tasks is what does it mean to be a people of grace in a public square that is bitterly divided on both sides, and seemingly willing to justify any means to an end. And so, Tony, get us started. Grace and politics.
Yeah, okay. Well, I am going to Mexico tomorrow to be a minister there for 2 months for a congregation. They have Wi-Fi, so I hope I can join next week if we have a concluding session.
Vaya con Dios.
Yeah, thank you.
Or as the bartender in Nobody's Fool says, vaya con huevos.
Okay. So that's about the limit of my Spanish, but Sebesos, please. Okay. So grace in society. This chapter I found challenging in two senses. One is kind of his full-orbed insistence on grace in dimensions of life where it, not that it isn't complicated everywhere, but where it's complicated for us today. And I suppose, for people always. And also, there were just some points I'd had a hard time tracking what he was saying. And of course, in the War and Peace section, I've opposed plenty of wars, beginning with Vietnam and ending with the last Iraq War, and taken plenty of heat for that. But I don't think I'm with him on the Ukraine war. I don't know. I mean, it's acquiescence to Putin and his invasion doesn't seem like a really great option. That would have resulted in something better, but clearly I don't know. In terms of ongoing life in these divided United States, and I think there's a bridge here from Ukraine. I don't labor under the illusion that every Ukrainian or all Ukrainian actions are good, or that they aren't capable of the same kind of terrible deeds that Russians are. Nor do I labor under the illusion that all Russians fighting are there because they are bad people and doing terrible things. And in our country, I have a hard time, or I don't want to see the church simply enlisted in the partisan culture war. It seems to me that the church has to not simply choose sides, but recognize the need for repentance on all our parts, and so I think seek some kind of I tend to lean liberal, but I don't want to dehumanize people on the other political side of the line. Nor do I want to valorize those that tend to be on my side. Last week I wrote a pretty scathing piece about the progressives, led by one of our congresspeople, Pramila Jayapal, and how exasperated I was with their stupid call for negotiations with Putin. So I'm quite willing to, probably to a fault, criticize my own crowd, and that's based in my Christian faith that we are all sinners in need of grace. Does that get us started?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I had similar initial reactions in terms of tracking with Paul, but I found at least a place where he was hoping to lay down some tracks, particularly in thinking through the first section on grace and society. I mean, I confess that's a pretty challenging thought in our particular day. I mean, if we just took the illustration of the attack on Paul Pelosi, and in my denomination, a fellow who tends to be, Captain Hot Take, and his primary kind of thing is to see if he can't gin up some sort of legalistic, if you do this, then, this dictates that,
It should have been Tier Hardy's Halloween costume tonight. Captain Hot Take.
Captain Hot Take. But he laid down this gauntlet on Sunday morning, essentially wanting people to report back to him, for any pastor who affirmed the idea that this was indeed a political assault, and had bought hook, line, and sinker the speculation that it was a lover's quarrel, which is bizarre beyond measure. But his response has been to, when he found out that the fellow very much confessed to it being a politically motivated act, was to lock down his Twitter account. So, only his sycophants can kind of connect with it. And I struggle wanting to give that fellow some grace. It's a struggle because, I think his very actions have been ungrace. So when Paul starts laying down some tracks to think through grace in society and our response, and he starts laying them down, I found that pretty helpful. And so I
can you give us a
Yeah,
couple of examples of what you found helpful?
Yeah. So in his, when he's, I was kind of just going back over it. So when he kind of starts in to give his kind of his systematic approach, and he argues for equality versus fairness, because really the law punishment rather is actually situational, and not evenly distributed. And so we are, that to me raises a problem, an issue. How do you adjudicate equality and fairness by people whose knee jerk is to talk about justice in terms of punishment, not setting things right. And so I thought that when he starts, laying that out, I was looking for a section he gives here. We are entitled to nothing. If we're entitled to anything at all, it is a one-way ticket to the loss of all things, which is death, and to regret for most things, which parallels our death. Therefore, the aim of political life is to establish the benefits of life on the basis of gift, which for Christian people is a result of the gift of God's graceful love in the redemption of the world. Simply put, everyone is entitled to death and judgment. Therefore, whatever we receive that is positive exists over and above that. It is gift. And so I don't think we think of, we struggle in a world where grace still seems to be earned and not gifted. And so when he lays that out, it challenges, I don't know if I've got enough grace for you, Jason, or this fellow. And I have to be reminded that I don't deserve, I deserve something far less as well. So here now, this gift is for all of us. And it just reframes sort of how that thinking might go when we run afoul of someone who's on the opposite side of the political spectrum or has a differing opinion as to what sort of end result should eventuate from a trial, or and so that was one of the places that I thought was helpful to the call back to remember that grace is a gift. And so when our penchant is to, mine is to, criticize in this case, is to not think about, well, I don't know what was going on in that guy's life that, bent him that direction, but he might need a gift.
So
is that too simplistic?
Well, if his Twitter account was still open and you were going to respond, what would grace look like?
Well, I responded to some friends. It was very ungraceful, but I would probably want to respond by pointing out that all of us make mistakes. That here he had pointed out these other instances where the news rush to judgment turned out to be an error, like the Smollett case. And that okay, so people make mistakes. So remember, you make them too. So we're going to, we're not going to cancel you on Twitter. We're not going to petition Elon to ban you. We're not going to try to take up some sort of action, punitive action. We recognize we all have made a rush to judgment here. We've all, played whataboutism. We've all, I would probably try to respond by identifying, the ways that I have done the same thing. Now, I'll be frank here, and, I doubt he ever sees it. I don't, the track record doesn't indicate that might accomplish anything, which would mean I should do it all the more. Because if giving grace is only given because I'm hoping it makes a change in this person, then one, I can't change anybody, and my attempt would not be very gracious by motive.
Thanks.
Yeah, Josh.
We tend to talk about politics as conservative and progressive, right? Conservative and liberal. And jumping off of Todd's last thought, I was thinking about earlier today, we have a friend in common who's related to Paul, David Zoll, and he has a chapter in his latest book, and he highlights the fact that there's this doubleness inside ourselves that we even within, even if you were to kind of stay in your own camp, if you find yourself, more liberal or more conservative, over time, there'll be reversals within that same ideology or framework. He lifts up this example that he liked going to his friend's house when he was a kid because they had a very modern home. Both parents worked. Mom was a successful executive at IBM. And when she came home, it was a political act to give herself permission to have time for herself, to go get tea at a local restaurant with friends, or to go to a woman's group. So it was this feminist thing to buy Domino's pizza for the kids, right? Instead of take the typical role and slave away in the kitchen to provide for her children. That was the progressive thing to do in the 1980s. But you look at the same group, a progressive group today, the ethos is that I wouldn't put that crap in my kid's body, right? It's still might vote for the same candidate, still might have a similar outlook on the world, but now this culinary thing has a totally different motivation behind it. And he just lifts up that when Todd was talking about what aboutism, that it's not numbers and statistics and reason that inform our politics as much as it is fear, hope, and love. And one more thing, if you all have ever familiarized yourself with the work of Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, stuff like that. He says that there's this, I'm trying to remember the name for it, moral foundation theory, right? And he says that there are these 5 kind of baselines for behavior in people that we all have. And they're harm, fairness, authority, in-grouping, and then, whether you want to call it purity or sanctity, but think more along lines of things that contaminate, disgust. We all have these features, but they tend to be more prevalent. And so authority, in-group behavior, and sanctity are very much where conservatives come from. And harm and fairness are where progressives come from most strongly. And so there are these things that we may say, the pollster may call your house and say, hey, what's important to you in this election? And you may say education, but it's really immigration that pulls your heartstrings, right? You may look at a particular candidate and that all politicians lie, but this person lies like they breathe, and they just, there is no fairness in their treatment of other people. And so it's like, it's always something that gets in your craw. So the important thing to remember is that we all do this. So how do you offer grace in knowing this about yourself and knowing this for whoever your political enemy is, the other, and
what's important about that, Jonathan Haidt, who used to teach at the University of Virginia, what the categories you just outlined, Josh, they're all emotional attachments that we're as much as we like to think, we think through our convictions in politics and religion and things like that. The reality is, it's like, social science tells us, is that we're primarily emotional creatures.
He likens it to a rider on an elephant,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the you think you're in the driver's seat, and that's your reason and your it doesn't mean that you don't have reason, right? You have it. It just, when that elephant wants to go somewhere, it's steering the ship and you're holding on. And that's true of our emotional life, right? There is this underground river that sweeps us up and takes us places, and then we justify the actions that we took when we use reason after the fact.
Yeah,
but it isn't.
Which is why, like, in our denomination, why very few people change their position on sexuality based on reasoned theological arguments or biblical study. That they're emotional commitments that people have, and if they're going to be persuaded out of them, it's an emotional arrow that gets to their heart, that gets them to change.
Yeah, Jonathan Haidt would say that in those categories again, and this doesn't describe everybody, it's just generalisms, but generally speaking, conservatives might look at something like that and look at homosexuality as your body's a temple, and there's something you can do to damage that temple, and this is disgusting, contaminating. Whereas a progressive person may look at that and say, why should that person not be able to love like anybody else loves? It's an issue of fairness, but it's a ground from where you move and make your judgments.
That's good. So, so I had two thoughts listening to you guys. One thought is that clearly what is sick about our politics, our culture, is that it is addicted to self-justification, the opposite of grace. So the disease is clear. Like it's not hard to diagnose. How to apply the medicine it isn't as easy to understand on more than a Tony to Todd scale. So that was one thought I had listening to you guys, and then another thought I had listening. So, like Todd, you mentioning the colleague you have. I don't know that we have paid enough attention to the fact that what Paul Zoll would call the law, like a little L law, is what is functioning in how media is constructed now, how social media works. That all of it is premised on affirmation. Like newspapers now are not dependent on advertising money. And therefore appealing to the broad middle of people who, everybody has to buy a mattress. But instead, like, how many clicks did that story get?
Right.
And so like we've all been put on treadmills that we can't see. And if the New Testament is correct and like the law produces the opposite, of course, the effect is to make us bitter and to coarsen us and to cause us to all to double down. But how you get out of that, I don't know.
Go back and
inducing
say,
silence among the group.
well, I was just processing what you just said, Jason, and I say a little bit more about how the law is
so if
operative in social media. I mean, I don't disagree, but I'm just trying to understand better your argument.
So if Josh mentioned Dave Zoll. So on Saturday, Dave Zoll gave a talk in Texas that Todd and I were at, and one of the observations he made, so he's talking about a theology of the cross versus a theology of the glory glory. And he said that, that we're really good at building ladders to try to climb our way to heaven. We're really bad at building bridges across divides to other people. And and the way, so the way social media works and the dopamine hits that it gives people is, how many times was your thing shared? How many times was your thing retweeted? How many times was your Facebook post liked? And so, so if you're going to get most affirmation from your self-selected tribe of people, by saying the most incendiary, black and white, ungracious things, to pull people out of that is like getting them to come off of a drug.
Yeah, I think it's a testimony to the ruling power of sin. And
yes.
But the question is, how do we individually and collectively, what does liberation look like, and how do we get free from that, which is, it seems to be on steroids. I guess the steroid is social media. It's
I think I just remarked that I think was the first week, or it could have been the second, that there was a question that when we were talking about the law, I think in a general sense, we were thinking capital L. I think it's important that, Jason, that you raise our awareness that we probably should think of law on a more broad level. So in other words, generally, if we think capital L law, we're thinking Mosaic law, we're thinking, sort of a religious context. But, small L law is what you're describing, shows up in every arena of life. We have all of these systems or institutions have these laws by which we engage them. And then to Tony's point, there's always a steroid to ramp up our transgression of whatever those laws are. And I just sometimes, that maybe just for me, but it took a while to kind of really, figure out how you would communicate to someone that they're as subject to the law and they're not thinking about any of the Ten Commandments, but they're not aware of the laws that are governing their, the laws that are triggering their responses, transgressive responses.
Yeah.
So one of the ways,
I don't know if that makes sense, but
no. So like to make that more specific, Todd, it's that even people in our culture who are not religious in any way and are not seeking to be justified before the Holy One of Israel, they are still seeking to be enough in the eyes of their peers, in the eyes of in the eyes of history, like whatever. Like they're still seeking enoughness.
And they're seeking it by belonging to a certain group that, by definition,
and that's
hates another group.
Josh mentioned Jonathan Haidt. Like the other part of that important book, The Righteous Mind, from Jonathan Haidt, is that what you're really seeking. So we're emotional creatures, and we're motivated not by the rightness of our beliefs, but belonging to a group. Mm-hmm. And the way that we prove that we belong to the group is to get pulled into ever more extreme confessions of faith, essentially. Like if Josh really wants to prove that he belongs in this group, he's going, over time, he's going to start saying the most strident versions of whatever their beliefs are to prove that he belongs to the group. And so there's this constant pull to the poles, to the ends. Yeah.
But Josh, that hasn't always been the case, and I don't think it was throughout my lifetime. I don't think it's always been the case. It seems like I don't know whether we were more rational. I don't have total faith in that, but I don't know. It seemed like we were less disposed toward, and I guess my thought would be, it seems like we've lost a kind of basic Christianity, which reminds us over and over again of our own need for grace.
Mm-hmm.
And there just aren't that many people exposed to that anymore. And what often gets presented as religion is just another exercise in tribalism and in-group, out-group stuff.
Yep.
And so it's, but how did this devolve into this where we are now? I don't know.
So all right, so Tony, that's a good place. So Josh, if we had to come up with some, all right, so we're going to do the second edition of Grace and Practice, post, in light of
Post-Trump.
yeah, like what are some like concrete principles for everyday Christians on how to apply grace and thinking about interacting with their crazy uncle who wears all the semi-fascist costumes and stuff, like what are some just go-to? Tony mentioned to start with, like gosh, well, I don't know, I'm someone for whom Jesus had to die.
Absolutely. So you're talking about Dave and saying we're good at building ladders, but not good at building bridges. So look at the building bridges. We are more and more siloed in the groups that we belong to, and part of the, I don't want to get off track where I'm going, but part of this chapter is is people even make politics, a new church becomes part of Christendom, all that kind of stuff. And then within that, we have partisan groups and things like that. So how do you build bridges across the divide? Well, Dave would say that when you're thinking about the law, think about somebody telling you what you need to do. What's your response? Usually it's the opposite, even from somebody in your group. So somebody speaking churchy language comes up to me and says, "Hey, Josh, I just need to tell you something. I need to tell you a little truth and love." Like my immediate response is, "Well, shit, where is this going?"
Top 5 least favorite phrases of all time.
Yeah. But if and change is not something we manipulate in somebody else, but in order to even occupy new ground where we're together instead of opposed or hurting each other, Dave would say the two biggest forces are desperation and love. Desperation, where the pain of not changing outweighs the change itself, right? Guy goes into the doctor and first 3 visits tells him the same thing. Your sugar's up, your cholesterol is up, your heart looks awful. If you don't change your lifestyle, you're going to die. And it's like, thanks, goes home, does the exact same thing. And then one day has this event that shakes him to his core. And now he's listening to the doctor. Same thing happens in relationships. And the other thing is love, where you don't have to get everything right in order to belong, to be part of this group. You're going to say stupid shit. You're going to put forth dumb things, but we're still family. We've all experienced this we're getting ready to come up on Thanksgiving. We've all been to those tables where those conversations come out, and all of a sudden, the pecan pie is ruined by somebody's political argument. But we also have, where we share stories and jokes and the things that we love. And, that forms a bond that we don't have to be the same. And I think in order to build bridges, we need to lean into that, to understand that about ourselves, and then to emotionally understand that about other people. Is there are things that are informing them, past life experiences, all kinds of things that are motivating them. And they don't have to be just like me or ascribe to all the things that I ascribe to in order for me to love them and for them to love me. I'm Christian because I think that's how God feels about me, right? So can I think about my neighbor the same way?
And sometimes the people that we interact with most are they're not neighbors in terms of real proximity.
Mm-hmm.
They're distant, and we're interacting because they're, on Twitter or on Facebook or on whatever. And so I quoted a rabbi in LA who was talking about he tries to avoid politics in the pulpit now. And I know that some, there's two sides to that, but he said in American society today, we get to know people's politics before we know their humanity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a great statement. And it seems to me church, as I've known it at its best, is not because we've got our act together, but because we get to know people's humanity.
But Tony, you're saying that, and it makes me think. I was listening to somebody earlier, and they were saying, I can't remember the author, but they were quoting somebody else's idea that just talking about sociologically, that human beings, so many of us, just demographically, population wise, we live in urban and suburban spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you interact with people who are strangers to you most of your time, right? That's not like we need to get back to some rose-tinted lenses where everybody knew each other. It's just to say that I might not recognize somebody's humanity because this is just some store clerk or some person on the subway or something else. They're all strangers to me. And this is the new way that we have conducted interactions. Instead of saying, oh, that's Frank, he's the town drunk, or that's Betsy, and somebody and their story, and then you lean into, well, why do you think the way you do, and why do you feel this way?
It's like, when everyone's bowling alone, you have a lot of angry bowlers.
Well, I think along that track is that, concretely, what do we do? Well, like that, I can't change anyone. And I mean, I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. We can't. We know that information doesn't. But what we recognize, if we're really interested, is we've got to admit to our own humanity. And that was one emphasis that David made in his talk. The bridges that are built because I recognize that I'm just like them. Mm-hmm. Whatever the them is. Whatever's got me so buzzed about the them that's got me ready to fire up Twitter or Facebook or whatever.
Yeah. So the like Todd doesn't build the bridge to Josh because Todd's like, well, I've been reading the Bible and I now understand that I need to bring the truth to you. And so now like I'm coming to you to bring you the true story of how things are. It's through vulnerability and shame and sin.
Yeah. Yeah, because and that runs counter because what's the mantra? Well, don't be mad at me. God said it. That sort of deal. You got to be mad at the Bible because I'm just telling you what the Bible says. You know what I mean? There's no room for any sort of progress in leveling out, equaling out the divide, recognizing the gift. If I'm not really ready to say, the things that are really ticking me off about this person and how they're responding, I do that.
And that's the problem with the cliche, speaking the truth in love, right? Because it's a power imbalance. It's like, exactly I'm right, you're wrong. Right. I'm going to find a passive aggressive way of communicating it to you, rather than like, I have fallen short. Oh my gosh, let me tell you how.
Right.
Yeah. Where Todd is, whether you mean to or not, you're articulating what we've talked about before in recovery groups, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
The power dynamic is equalized when you begin with confession, right? Mm-hmm. I'm an alcoholic. Hey, Josh, welcome to the club,
Right.
But we're starting with, I understand that I'm broken. Yeah.
So really at some level, if we were kind of rewriting it for, today, that's this section, I think the instructive piece would be, don't forget you received grace. I mean, don't forget that you needed, that sort of thing, because it's the moment we move up the ladder that I now am looking down on the person, behind me. And so every time I'm taking that step on that rung up, because my in group has a set of laws that I've got to keep, which is always going to leave someone in my wake. Now I look back because I'm climbing this ladder and you're not. So Josh, you're just not nearly as good. And when you make a mistake, it's magnified because I'm actually looking at it from up here. And so I think that, there is a very real sense of, humility. And Jason had a line, tweeted it today. He had a line about humility in his talk at Mockingbird, and it was humility happens to us. You don't go out and get to go. I think if I could just be humbled, I think I could probably get there and we would get along a whole lot better, So I need to go out there and figure out, what's my process of humbling myself? Well, no, humility happens to us. Even if we're going to quote the Bible, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, for he will lift you up. The comparison is I'm not God. So it's pretty humbling to recognize I'm not God. So, I think that
it's odd that it seems to come as a revelation to many of us.
And that points out too, I think, just how corrosive social media is, right? Because the kind of accountability that humility names isn't, you can say all kinds of stuff online, foment violence and hate, and the accountability is never going to come back to you. And so it's pernicious in a way that I don't know that the church has really taken the time to think about while we're live streaming our services to these platforms and this class and all this stuff.
Yeah,
This online class tonight, by the way, was brought to you by Philip Morris. Just so
yeah. And okay. You chased what I was going to say out of my mind. It'll come back, but well, it seems like I guess I want to go back to a kind of emphasis that some of us made in the last couple of decades on practices, Christian practices. And it's not so much you have to get it right and then you're in, or it's you do these things over and over to shape a certain kind of person. And I think really the things we do, it seems to me worship is always made up of these practices, beginning with praise or adoration, kind of getting us unhooked from ourselves, decentering us a little bit, confession of sin, and the assurance of grace, and listening for a word beyond ourselves. These are all practices, and I think what I see happening is that in place of those practices, we have the practices of social media, which I think in many ways, are that shape different kinds of people and not very gracious people. Now, I know the church is fallible and all that stuff, but what are the practices that are forming us? And it seems to me what we're trying to do in church is not directly change somebody, but do things together that have a certain kind of formative direction. And I don't know where that's happening, formation and grace, where that's happening. Certainly not on Twitter, and it's ironic, but seemingly totally appropriate that Elon Musk is in charge of it.
The greatest shit poster of all time now owns it.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. But that's a good point, because the prophet Isaiah being told by the Lord to prophesy naked, Like, I mean, that like, there's no more vulnerable thing for God to ask you to do than like speak the truth, like with no clothes on. That's a lot different than just, you know, clanking away on your keyboard, you know, from the safety of, you know, your home and your self-selected audience of people.
Right. And there's been a big debate in online media. I used to write for a site called Crosscut. I write for another one now called Post Alley. But the debate was, do we let people put their stuff on the comment thread with doing it anonymously? And I always was kind of against that, because I you know, and the editor said, well, we'll get more if we do that. And I said, well, it seems to me you're inviting people to kind of be bad actors, but you're also prohibiting any kind of human interaction, because you're not, you know, you're not even revealing your name, much less. So I used to, when I was in the newspaper, I would get a lot of direct emails from people, and you know, there would be people that anything I said would result in the same really raft of criticism, and the people would do that every week. So finally I got in touch with a couple of these folks, and I said, hey, how about having coffee together? And uniformly the answer was no. Why would I do that? You know, I don't want to meet you. I don't want to talk with you. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that's something that rents space in my head about the thing I need to do next is David Fitch will talk about, you know, a huge not just growing edge, but a waymaker for his ministry was just going down to the local McDonald's and having coffee with another group of people on a regular basis, just being in the community,
right?
And you know, let God show up in our midst. Just listen.
Yeah.
You know? And but when you're talking, Tony, I hope this isn't too hard a transition, but it was making me think of the other part of the reading, and that is the same gripes that we're having about social media are very similar to warfare. Think about the distance between World War I and 2022 Ukraine. Seeing the opposition, you know, being able to look into their eyes, versus whether you're sending ordnance or whether you're sending a drone. You know, it was sold to us as, you know, well, we'll keep people out of harm's way. But what it very quickly became, and it wasn't a disguise in the first place, was a way to do warfare over there, where I don't have to be involved. I don't have to see my neighbor, right? And it very much changes the dynamic.
Yeah, and article in the paper this weekend was celebrating the Ukrainians' homemade drones, cheap, inexpensive drones that were taking down Russian tanks, playing into the David and Goliath narrative that we've got going on that one, me included.
So I know, so we're approaching an hour here, but I know Ryan Couch, I got it wrong last time too. Ryan wanted some thoughts on Paul Zoll's critique of the two kingdoms theory. And so I would like you guys, for the non-nerds here, to simply explain the doctrine of the two kingdoms, and then give your understanding of Paul Zoll's critique of it. Starting with Josh.
For non-nerdy language, Martin Luther said he conceived of this as two spheres, God is in charge of everything, but God's the only one who's able to move as a free agent. So there are two spheres: a political sphere and a spiritual church sphere. And he compartmentalized this. I'm gonna live my religious life and my obligations to God, but kings and dukes and lords, they have to do their thing, and I can't tell them what to do as an agent of the church. I just have to trust that God is controlling that as well, or influencing that as well.
Okay. Yeah. So there's the kingdom of heaven, there's the kingdom of earth. So what a plus side of the doctrine of the two kingdoms is that it might make you not invest your political commitments with
just sanctification,
theological import, like it's on us to like rescue America and build the kingdom of God on earth. So it lowers the temperature a little bit potentially. But the downside, Nazi Germany being the most obvious example, it disempowers Christians from saying no when their governments use Christian language to do anti-Christian things.
Yeah, and Zoll talks in the book about so he was Casemon wasn't his doctor.
Yeah, he was a student of Casemon.
He was a student of Casemon.
Yeah.
But he talks about how Casemon is in Germany, and the Nazis, at the time were telling him, you tend to the spiritual things and we'll take care of the temporal things. Thanks. You go mind your little churchy business. We'll take care of the important stuff. And it makes this dichotomy where you're not able to talk across the divide.
Mm-hmm. You guys have more thoughts about that?
Well, I think that distinction is still alive, and probably all of us have had some member of the board of trustees tell us, you just stick to the spiritual things, Pastor, and we'll take care of the money, as if the two had nothing to do with each other. So I think there's a fundamental, it's a kind of docetism. It's heretical. It's separating, it's spiritual in a way that Jesus in Scripture never did, from real life, from true life. That said, I think that we've gotten to a place now where politics has so taken over people's life and identities, except for those who pretty much explicitly just depoliticize themselves, that that we need to push back perhaps the other direction and say that politics is important and it has a place, but it doesn't totally define all of life or all of who you are. Before God, you're more than that, you're less than that, whatever. I don't, what I'm trying to say, but it seems to me that I get distressed in my own part of Christendom that we simply seem to have signed up to be on the political left, and people accuse us of being the Democratic Party of prayer, and I think that is a real problem. And it's a problem on the right, maybe even worse. So that I think there is some distinction, but it's not the facile distinction that the Nazis presented Casemon with, or that a well-meaning trustee might have, or maybe not well-meaning trustee might have meant when they said, Pastor, you just tend to saving of souls, and we'll worry about the money and the property and everything else like that.
Yeah, so it's like, and this is not a political comment, so don't interpret. Well, I guess it is. So the way that before the 2016 election, like evangelicals wanted to interpret the rise of Donald Trump. Maybe he's like a King Darius type figure from the Old Testament, that he in no way exhibits any sort of Christian virtues or practices, but maybe God's using him in this completely contrary sort of way. That's kind of a two kingdoms theory at work, whether the people using it would express it that way, that God acts one way in Jesus Christ in the spiritual realm, but God is free to act in a completely contrary way to how he has revealed himself in Christ outside of the spiritual realm. And so like part of the problem with the two kingdoms is they're very often contradictory to each other.
Well, I don't know that I thought that was necessarily a two kingdoms argument. I heard people say, God, okay, Trump is obviously a very fallible guy, but God can work through fallible people, and I think that is true.
It is true, but I think what Paul Zoll's reacting to against Luther's two kingdoms theory is that if the one-way love of God in Jesus Christ is the absolute truth, then you can't have an understanding of the kingdom of the earth such that it contradicts cross and resurrection.
Yeah, I agree with that. He wants to be consistent, and grace is not just reserved. I mean, that's been one of the problems for the church in the modern era, is the church gets shuttled off to the private sphere with no public implication. And it becomes kind of an extension of home and family, and then the woman's area, and very limited. I mean, to use anyhow. So I don't know that. It seems like the two kingdoms is in its pure form. It's not often in its pure form. It's often like Niebuhr's Christian realism is a kind of two kingdoms theory, that we can't expect nations to be moral. We can only expect individuals to be moral. So there's gradations there. It's not a black or white, it's a spectrum. That's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Any thoughts, Todd?
I think that
in Oklahoma, there's just one kingdom.
Yeah, right.
Is that the Sooners?
Sooners, correct. That is correct.
Yeah.
I think one way that the two kingdoms shows up, that people would maybe be as or more familiar with, is how that breaks down to our own individual perspectives on our decisions. Classically, when I'm at church, kind of these are the things that are governing my, principles of relationship. But man, I got a business to run on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sphere, it's dog eat dog. There's no grace here. What are you talking about? I've got to have full on high demand, high expectations of my employees, or that will never produce anything. So these are separate spheres. They shouldn't interlock. We're not talking about joyful at work. Quit. I need you to churn it out. I think most people would probably resonate a bit with how that could then work itself up into political relationships, because in my growing up, that was sort of how we separated the sphere. I watched it. It's how the spheres were separated. And I don't know if it's true or not, but allegedly it was this sort of two kingdom living that actually contributed to LaVey's leaving any form of Christianity and organizing the first church of Satan. I want you to do what you're going to do. Quit worrying about, like, if you're going to do it on Sunday or Monday, why don't you just go do what you're going to do? And so I think that's maybe a more familiar way that people might encounter the two is when we separate spheres in our own lives. And then, we can work that up to see how that works out in politics.
Yeah, on November 1st, I think on Hulu, there's going to be a documentary on the Falwell scandal.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the
Well,
Falwell dynasty is a perfect example of, hey, it's just business. This is how we do in the boardroom. You cross Falwell, I'll cut you off at the knees and dismiss you. But we're a Christian university, and you shouldn't drink and have premarital sex.
hey, that's truer than you realize. So, the book of Falwell is a book written by someone who kind of wanted to try to make sense of Falwell. And in the opening, I think it's the opening chapter to the writer, not a Christian person, but intrigued, points out how Falwell made the move from an apolitical to kingdom vision. We're just going to, we need to get people on the boat, and we're not going to have anything to do with politics. Don't talk about. He exclusively taught his, mentees and interns and fellow staff, no politics in the pulpit, nothing. In the 70s, he changed his mind with the onset of the moral majority. And so he went back and had them go back to the Thomas Road Library and expunge all the sermons where he had ever said, don't make any reference to politics in the pulpit, because that's fixing to change. So, there was for this long-standing thing that now, Junior was formed in, that, Dad said, okay, well, we're going to go full tilt in the other direction. Here we go. So, no wonder he was confused as to, what sphere to make his application in. But,
Yeah.
Josh, you're going to do like a screening of the documentary at your church, right?
Yeah. We're going to eat all the leftover Halloween candy that we got rained out.
Okay.
Oh,
Before I
boy.
say anything inappropriate.
Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities.
a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
So I have a question from our dear respondent who is going to begin the class, but she prefers to just have her question read. She says, a few weeks ago, I heard on the news that the immigrants who were transported out of Florida had returned to Florida to help clean up after the hurricane. Do you think my connection reflects a view on law/grace, or both? How does God show justice without using the law, or is his law actually grace?
Mhm.
You want to come on camera? And
She does not.
Uh,
I don't know quite what she's asking.
I'm not quite getting the connection to the immigrants. I haven't read that, but maybe I'm not contesting it. I'm just how's that tie in?
We need clarification. She really doesn't want to be on the.
That's fine.
All right. So next week we'll start there next week.
Yeah. Well, I hope we've helped the person who wrote in about the two kingdoms theory. Yeah.
Any last thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, it'd be interesting. So will Paul be on with us next week?
On November 21st.
Oh, 21st. So we're going 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks? What are we going to do all those weeks?
You just said that like it's an obligation, Tony.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out.
We slowed down. So we split up.
1, 2, 3. We've got
4.
We've only got 1 more chapter, right? Grace in the Church.
No.
We've got 2 more chapters.
Oh, Grace in Everything. Okay.
So we've got 2 more
2.5
sections,
chapters.
and then Paul will just be a catch-all.
Okay.
So we're doing Grace in the Church next week. Grace in Everything on the 14th.
Okay, hold on a minute. So I'm not confused. We cut the reading down. So are we going to kind of just bypass grace and criminal justice, relation to social class, and at the mall off of section 4?
I mean, if
we didn't say a lot about those.
Well, it's because we cut the reading. Someone suggested we cut the reading last week. So what me? I'm just saying
Oh,
I'm
I
just
missed
helping you fill your weeks.
Yeah, thank you.
Just helping you fill your weeks.
All right.
Well,
So
I missed that memo.
I think Todd is trying to humiliate you, Jason.
Someone asked him if he could cut the reading, and he cut the reading for us.
No, I'm teasing about your
Oh.
your quote earlier.
Oh,
It
yes.
has to be done to you.
Yes.
Okay. So all right. So next week we will talk about so page 203 to 224. That's what we'll do, because Grace and Everything is very short.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do the rest of Grace and Society next week, Grace in the Church the following week, and Grace and Everything with Paul Zoll.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
Happy
Grace and
Halloween.
peace with you all.
Good to be with you.
Yes.
Safe
Good to be
travels.
together. Thank you.
Bio con huevos, Tony.
Yeah. See.
Safe travels.
Yep. Thank you.
Go with eggs.
Go with X.
That's what it means.
That's what
It's
huevos.
funny in the movie.
Yeah.
Have you seen the movie?
Which one?
movie is it?
Nobody's Fool with Paul Newman, Jessica Tandy, and Bruce Willis, and I can't remember her name.
If I have, it's been
Yeah,
too
it's
long.
been a long time.
It was nominated for the Academy Award, I think the year that Pulp Fiction won, so everyone forgot it. But it's a wonderful movie. Oh, Philip Seymour Hoffman is in it. I think it's his first movie.
Oh, really?
It's one of Paul Newman's finest roles. Right.
Nobody's fool.
It's so good.
Okay.
It's
Check
just
it
it
out.
makes me happy to be alive.
I'll have to.
You will love it. It's a good novel too, but the movie's actually better.
I'll have to watch it.
It's by the guy who wrote Empire Falls. Did you guys read
Seen
that?
that.
See it?
Yeah.
But yeah, Paul Newman, so good.
Yep.
Isn't it weird to think that we're approaching the time period where most people will only know of Paul Newman as the salad dressing guy?
I mean, I remember him in The Sting.
Yeah. But most people won't.
No, you're right.
If you ask my kids, would you want to watch this great black and white movie or go to the dentist? They'd have to think about it for a while. Well, can I be on my phone during the black and white movie?
So to be young again.
Yes.
Well,
All right, guys.
it's a pleasure to be with you guys.
See you
as
guys.
well.
I miss you already, Todd.
Yes, we'll have to just not make it so long in between times.
So, Josh, he left. Oh, I was going to do a dad joke thing.